The story of London begins over 2 millennia ago during the time of the ancient Romans. In 43 AD, the Romans established a settlement on the banks of the River Thames, which they called Londinium. The origin of the name Londinium is uncertain, but it's believed to have Celtic roots, possibly meaning place on the marsh. During the Roman period, Londinium grew into a thriving port city and an important center of trade and commerce in Britannia. Its strategic location made it a hub for merchants and travelers from across the Roman Empire, and its bustling streets were lined with markets, temples, and public buildings. However, Londinium's prosperity was not to last. In the early 5th century, the Roman Empire began to decline, and Londinium fell into disrepair. It wasn't until the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons in the 6th century that the city began to regain its former glory. Under Anglo-Saxon rule, London emerged as a prominent political and cultural center. It became the capital of the Kingdom of Essex and later the Kingdom of England, playing a pivotal role in the unification of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms under the rule of King Aethelstan in the 10th century. The Norman conquest of 1066 brought about a new chapter in London's history. William the Conqueror, impressed by the city's strategic importance, built the Tower of London to assert his control over the city and its inhabitants. Over the centuries, the tower would become synonymous with power, wealth, and intrigue, serving as a royal palace, fortress, and prison. The medieval period saw London grow rapidly in size and importance. It became the largest city in England and a center of trade, finance, and culture. The construction of iconic landmarks such as Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, and the House of Parliament transformed the cityscape, shaping London's identity as a symbol of English monarchy and governance. The Tudor and Stuart periods witnessed further expansion and development in London as the city became the political, economic, and cultural capital of England. The reigns of monarchs such as Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and James I left an indelible mark on the city, with grand palaces, theaters, and gardens springing up across London. The Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries brought about unprecedented growth and change in London. The city's population skyrocketed, fueled by migration from rural areas and abroad, and its skyline was transformed by factories, warehouses, and railway stations. Despite the challenges of overcrowding, pollution, and poverty, London emerged as the world's largest and wealthiest city, a symbol of progress and innovation in the modern age. Today, London stands as a global metropolis, a vibrant melting pot of cultures, languages, and identities. From the historic streets of the City of London to the bustling markets of Camden Town, the city's diverse neighborhoods and landmarks reflect its rich and multifaceted history. Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of the Travel Like Locals podcast. I am your host, Alex Tabbery. In this episode, we will dive into the city of London, England. I visited London for the first time in the summer of 2015 as a part of a European tour I was on that my family had gotten me as a high school graduation gift. During this trip, we saw many of the most iconic sights from Westminster Abbey to Big Ben to Tower Bridge and, of course, the changing of the guards. We ended this trip with a Jack the Ripper tour before hopping on a train to Paris. My next trip came 4 years later in the summer of 2019 as part of a trip I was taking to celebrate my college graduation. My sister's high school orchestra was performing at some cathedrals in the city, so I capped off my trip by meeting up with my dad in London. Together we toured the Tower of London, rode the London Eye, and walked across Abbey Road. We then spent one day taking an amazing day trip to visit Windsor Castle, Bath, and Stonehenge. I've returned to London twice since for work trips where I was able to find time to see Platform 9 3/4 from Harry Potter, climb on top of the O2 Arena as part of Up at the O2, watch a performance of King Lear at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and stand on the Prime Meridian at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. Though I might have experienced a lot, with how massive a city it is, there's always so much more to see. It is impossible to think of London without thinking of the tasty fish and chips. You can find my recipe for this iconic dish on my Instagram and TikTok at @TLL_pod. Shortly, you will hear my interview with local tour guide and host of the Ladies Who London podcast, Lacey. She will provide tips on the best way to experience the changing of the guard, how to properly enjoy tea, and discuss some of the best theater shows currently ongoing. As always, for all of our recommendations and more, be sure to check out my website, www.tllpod.com. But for now, on to the interview. I would like to welcome our next guest on the podcast, a tour guide from London, England. We have Alex. Alex, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, and congratulations on having the best name.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.
So how did you get into being a tour guide?
It's a slightly roundabout story, to be honest. I've always loved travel, as I think probably every tour guide you speak to will say exactly the same thing. But I hadn't ever really traveled much until I was about 18. We'd done little trips with my family to northern France and things, but I'd never really traveled on my own. And then when I was 18 and I finished school, high school, as you'd call it, I took a year out and I worked in Europe in a variety of different places, and the bug was born. And so when I went to university a year later to do languages, I carried on sort of traveling, working abroad in the summers. And then after I graduated, I moved to France and worked, well, firstly as a teacher in a school. That's not my forte. That's not where my talents lie. And then I became a tour guide in a champagne house, and that was great, and I loved it. But I got a little bit bored of saying the same thing every day because every tour was the same. So I came back to the UK and I started by being a tour leader. So I'm sure it's a similar route for a lot of people. You start leading tours around the world. And I was really lucky. I got to go to New Zealand, Australia, all across Europe, the US. I mean, a whole variety of amazing places. And then after about, oh, goodness me, 7 or 8 years of doing that, I decided that I actually wanted to be home a bit more. I was missing, weddings and anniversaries and things like that. So that was when the crash happened in 2009. And I ended up going into office jobs, which I'd never really planned to do, but they were all in travel. And I bounced between a few. And then after a few years, just went, actually, you know what? I've worked with Blue Badge Guides, which is the professional accreditation here in the UK. I've worked with them a lot. It seems like a great job. I looked into it, and I sat down and I wrote a list. What are the things you want to do in a job, and what are the things you don't want to do in a job? And it all pointed to being a tour guide. So I applied. And it was really tough to get on the course, but I did. It takes 2 years to train and to get your qualification. And I qualified in 2015, and the rest, as they say, is history. So it's a bit
awesome.
It's a bit of a convoluted one, but probably a route that's relatively similar to a lot of people that come into it.
Yeah. So do you have like any area of expertise like that you specialize in specifically, or you kind of just do any tour?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will do almost any tour. I'm one of those people so a lot of guides, we all train in London, particularly on variety of sites. So things like the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, the British Museum, things like that. So that in fact, in places like Westminster Abbey and the Tower of London, you have to have the accreditation that I have, the Blue Badge, in order to guide there. You cannot guide there unless you have that, or you are one of their in-house like the Beefeaters who do the tours. It's the same for the Abbey in a few places. And so everyone can sort of do all of those things, and I love doing them, but I also really love the stories of people who are a bit lesser known. So I love, I have a Harlots tour, which talks about the 17th century Georgian sex trade. I love street art. Street art is one of my specialities. I love it so much. Food tours as well. And just a lot of my agents know that if they want something creative or unusual, they come to me and I go, oh yeah. So I have done tours I've done a One Direction tour. I have done Doctor Who tours. I mean, you name it. If it's really weird and obscure, I'll do it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So I just wanted to start off the podcast by going through some common myths about London, and just for you to tell me if they're true or not, basically.
Love these. Yep, fine. Good.
So first one, probably the thing that London is most known for. The first myth is London is always foggy and rainy.
Oh, do you know what? I get that a lot. And the number of times I have guests who come to London and go, the weather's amazing. I'm like, yeah. Because we don't have rain all the time. Yes, we do have, a rain. And I think the reason people think it's raining all the time is there's often quite a few days that might get a little bit. But in terms of actual rainfall, this is a true figure that California has more rainfall than London in a year. It just all happens at once. Whereas
Yeah.
London, they spread it out a little bit. Fog, if I, I've lived here for nearly 20 years. I have very rarely seen fog or mist. If it does happen, it's usually in the mornings, often in the winter, but it's quite rare. And I don't get up. I don't like getting up early, so I don't see it that often. I do
Yeah.
actually. There was one time it was just after the first lockdown for COVID had been announced, and we woke up and it was I've never seen fog or mist like it. And I got on my bike and I cycled up to Tower Bridge and I took some photos. But even by 10 o'clock, it had all gone. So people, have got that image of London being foggy and men in top hats and capes like stalking through the streets. It's not like that at all. But a lot of that comes back to the pollution that we used to have. So there's reasons why, but no, it's not all that bad.
Yeah. All right. The second one, I think a lot of people probably confuse. England and the United Kingdom are the same thing.
Okay, they're not. Okay, and I'm going to throw another one into the mix. Great Britain as well. England. So the United Kingdom is a nation that has 4 countries as a part of it, which is England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. That is known as the United Kingdom. If you call it Great Britain, it's just all the ones that are attached. So England, Scotland, and Wales. So we leave out Northern Ireland at that point. And then England is a constituent part of the United Kingdom. So people get very confused. And I have to say, when everyone comes to London, you go, I'm going to England. Great, fine. If you're then adding Edinburgh onto your trip, don't say you're going to England. Because they get very cross about that.
Yeah.
So the United Kingdom is the whole thing.
Perfect. Okay, and next one that I think, at least in America, every kid grows up with this one. London Bridge is falling down.
Yeah, I know. And I'm going to slightly disappoint you on this one because we don't 100% know where that comes from. And I think the reason it's so famous is because of the song. There's almost certainly a reason somewhere in the mists of time. However, it's been lost. We think it might relate to there was at one point we were way back at, in the not in the literally the sort of triple digits, not even the thousands, being invaded by one Danish force, and there was a king here called King Olaf who happened to be here at the time, and possibly he pulled down the bridge to stop the invading forces crossing, but realistically that's not a thing. Although I have to say there is a London Bridge in Arizona, and that was starting to sink, which is one of the reasons why we got rid of it and sold it, because just the weight of traffic going across it as it developed. So the honest answer is we don't know, but we do have London Bridge. It has not fallen down. In fact, the 5th one is there today and is very stable.
There we go. Okay, next one. Chicken tikka masala is the national dish.
Ooh, now, yes, that is true, actually. So it always used to be fish and chips, and it realistically, fish and chips, is obviously very popular and everyone who comes here wants to have it. However, chicken tikka masala, we had a huge influx of people from India, from Bengal in the post-war years, so 1940s, 1950s. And particularly in those post-war years, there were a lot of bombed out buildings. And what they would do is they'd set up kitchens and restaurants, but they'd open really late because all of their workers would be coming back late, and so it kind of became the habit that people would go for a curry after having gone to the pub for a load of drinks because it was the only place open. And gradually chicken tikka masala, which is not a traditional Indian dish, it's one that's been made a lot more mild for the English palate, was sort of created and then has become one of the most eaten dishes in the UK. So that is accurate. Yeah. And it's brilliant. Have you had it?
There we go. Oh, yeah. I love it.
It's so good. Indian food is the best.
Agreed. Okay. Last one. London is very expensive.
Now, that is true. Although, what I always say to people when they come to London is all of the things you want to see in London are either free or quite expensive. There doesn't seem to be a middle ground. So we have a lot of really amazing museums like the British Museum, the Natural History Museum, Science Museum, V&A, that are or Imperial War Museum, all these sort of things are completely free to go in. National Gallery, National Portrait Gallery, there's a whole heap of them. But then every other things like the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, there are charges to go in, and they usually range from about sort of £20 to £35, depending on which site you're at. So it can be expensive, and it's a major city. It's like New York or Paris. You're going to pay a premium. food is going to be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. And there are ways around paying too much for lower quality things. Um, and there's ways of getting good hotels and traveling, off peak as well. London is not a city that you come to for the weather, let's face it. So don't travel in June or July, travel in October, travel in April, and you'll get better prices and often really quite nice weather.
Okay, no, that perfectly fed into my next question. So you would say off peak times, like not peak summer, really?
Yeah, I mean, so the summer obviously is fantastic, but it gets so busy, and I have to say, London is getting busier every single year. Us as guides, we just can't believe it. Every year we think, oh, it can't be busier, and then it is, and it's crazy. My favourite times in London, I love spring. Spring in London is just the best, and autumn as well. Um, there's usually end of September, beginning of October. The weather's quite nice and stable. I love autumn. I love it when you get all the fall foliage happening. It gets a little bit quieter. My top tip actually is the first week of September, because the first week of September, all the US kids have gone back to school. The
Hmm.
UK kids are in the process of going back to school, and everybody who wants to travel when the kids aren't traveling are like, we'll give it another week. So the 1st of September is usually really nice and quiet because
Okay.
everyone's going either going back to school or people going, we'll just give it a bit.
Hmm.
I love, yeah. So Easter's obviously incredibly busy. All the big peaks, Easter, summer, that kind of thing. Christmas gets really busy too. But the depending on where Easter is in the year, the kind of March, April bit that's not the Eastery bit is really nice. And I mean, it's what are we? The 9th of March we're recording on, and the weather today is gorgeous. So yeah, obviously you can't guarantee the weather, but you will
Sure.
find that there's a lot more kind of bang for your buck in those times. Yeah.
So on the weather for the extreme ends, how cold and hot does it get?
We are definitely finding more extremes than we ever used to have. So the summer is getting warmer, and we've the last few years we've had one sort of, I guess, 2 or 3 or 4 days of a heat wave. That can get up to right now. I don't know in Fahrenheit.
I can convert it.
Can you? Okay, brilliant. This is good.
Yeah.
This is good. So it usually hovers in the early 20s, 21,
Okay.
22, 23. We've had the odd spike where it's gone up to about 30 or even above, but that's usually quite short lived. And in the winter, I mean, we're quite a mild city. I always like to say that the weather is like the people. We're not really extreme on either end. We're very kind of, oh yes, in the middle, we like to please. So the winter, it can get chilly, and again we can get some cold snaps, and we might get a dusting of snow, but it'll probably happen once and last a day.
Hmm.
So it can get down to freezing, but usually won't stay there for too long. I think today it's about 10 or 11 degrees. So yeah, we sort of hover in the middle a little bit. We're quite mild as a sort of temperate country. Yeah, it's not bad.
Okay. And so I'll convert that. The 20 degrees, that's about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. 30 is about 90 Fahrenheit. And then 10, that's today, I guess, it's about 50 Fahrenheit. So it seems pretty similar to what
Yeah.
we actually have in Texas, which is
Oh
surprising.
really?
Yeah.
Gosh, but doesn't Texas get super hot in the summer though?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we don't get that hot.
Well, I mean, it definitely depends on the part, but it's the humidity that gets to you. Okay, so my next question was: are there any major local events or festivals throughout the year that are worth people specifically traveling for to visit?
So really good question. There are quite a lot of so the great thing about London is there's so much quirky stuff. And you'll often find there are little one-day things. And I wouldn't necessarily call them festivals, but they are often really historic um days where something is happening, like a ceremony that's been going back for 1100 years or something crazy like that, which aren't necessarily worth making the journey specifically for, but if you're over for it, it's great to go and see because you feel quite special. There'll be like 50 people there and it'll be fantastic. I think the Trooping of the Colour is one of the big ones. That is the monarch's birthday, which is usually the second weekend in June. Obviously things can get quite busy, but if you want to see the royal family, it's a given because they will process down the Mall, which is the main sort of mile-ish long road in front of Buckingham Palace. In the carriages, you'll have all of the guards in their bearskin hats and their red jackets and the bands and everything. The only trick with that is it gets very busy. So if you want to have a front row seat, you've got to get up quite early. But I will tell you a little insider's tip that the previous 2 weekends, they do rehearsals for it. The royals aren't always there, or sometimes it's one of the let's say, I don't mean this pejoratively, but minor royals like maybe Prince Edward or Princess Anne, but they will still have all of the carriages and the marching, and it is amazing to see. But there will be fewer people there, so that's a little top tip. New Year in London is great fun. We have the huge big fireworks displays, although again, it's lots of standing around, and there are ways and means of doing that. The Lord Mayor's show, which is in, I'm going to say October, I think. I need to double check the date on that. It's either September or October, which is every year the new Lord Mayor of the City of London is installed. And again, it's a fantastic procession through the streets of the City of London, which is separate to the main bit of London. And it's carriages and floats and all sorts of amazing stuff. I'm sure there's something I've missed and I can't think what, but there's a whole manner of running races. Oh, the London Marathon is actually a great one to be here for. If it's one of the biggest, in fact, no, it is the biggest public participation sport in the world.
Wow.
And it happens every year around kind of April time. And that's great. You know, if you're a runner and you want to come and do the London Marathon, the atmosphere is brilliant. But there's also, they do all kinds of different running races, 10Ks, 5Ks, half marathons throughout the year. So if you're into your running, you can come and join things like the Royal Parks Half Marathon or the Winter Run, and you get to run sort of through loads of these amazing monuments to London, Big Ben and Houses of Parliament, and usually they finish by Buckingham Palace. So if you're a bit of a runner and you want to do a bit of touristing alongside some fitness, then that's a good one to do.
Perfect. Okay, so I usually like to ask people some local words or phrases. Obviously, English is the same, but I think there are obviously very particular terms to England that are very different than the American slang. So,
Yeah.
are there any of these that you like to highlight on tours to people that are very stereotypically English?
Yeah, there are some. And I think so. The one that people always want to ask about is the word cheeky. Because people hear it all the time, and I think a while ago, One Direction. I don't know why I mentioned One Direction twice in this chat, but anyway, I think they had this thing where they would go for a cheeky Nando's, and everybody wanted to know what that was. And cheeky kind of has two meanings. You can call a child if they're being naughty, but in quite a funny way, then you're being cheeky. So if they're sort of making fun or being a little bit rude, you can be don't be cheeky. But cheeky can also mean quick. So I would say to people, if you want to feel really British, you can say to someone, "Oh, should we go for a cheeky pint?" So it just means a quick pint. And a quick pint for a Londoner is 3 pints and 3 hours. So like, it will never just be a pint or a cheeky half, which is a half a pint, even though people know what that really means. Let's go for a few drinks. The other one, so there is a very particular type of dialect in London, which is called Cockney rhyming slang, which people may or may not have heard of. Particularly highlighted, not correctly, 100% though, in the second Mary Poppins movie. Mary Poppins, well, I like to call Mary Poppins the Revenge, and the Lin-Manuel's character he does some sort of Cockney speak. Now they call it lamplighter speak or Leary speak, because I think there was something they made up, so it doesn't necessarily translate. But what it means is that you take two words that rhyme with the word you want to say, but then you remove the word that rhymes, which is incredibly complex. But I'll give you an example. For example, if you were to say, and some of these actually don't just London, they go into the entirety of the UK now. So my dad would always say to me when I was a kid, right, it's time for bed, up the apples. Apples and pears is stairs. So you take away the bit that rhymes, and then it was a way of being able to kind of communicate, all the sellers in the East End to be able to communicate amongst themselves without the police being able to understand them, so they could get away with whatever they wanted to do. So apples and pears is stairs. One of they can be updated as well. So if you're going to the pub for a cheeky Britney Spears are beers. So you can say, I'm going to go to the pub for a cheeky Britney. The one that is, you can say this to any Brit and they will understand you, because some of these get so ingrained into British English that they just go across the entire country, is if you want to have a look at something, you say, I'm going to have a butcher's. And it's a butcher's hook, which means a look. So if you want to feel super London, if you're going into a shop and the person in the shop, you walk in and they say, oh, can I help? If you just say, I'm just having a cheeky butcher's, and they go, okay, cool, carry on. You'll be like, oh my God, I'm a Londoner. And it just means I'm having a quick look. I'm having a quick look. That's all it is. I'm having a cheeky
Yeah.
butcher's. But there's so many little words and phrases like that
Yeah, so
that they use.
I work for a company based out of the UK, so I have a bunch of
Okay.
coworkers from England, and there's been so many times that I've had to say, "What are you talking about?" Like they'll we'll be working on something, and they'll be like, "Oh, that's a Scooby," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "Oh, Scooby Doo, like it's a mystery." Never would
Oh,
have
now
guessed
I've
that.
not heard of that one,
A
but
Scooby.
well, the way that I know Scooby is that if you say to someone, "Oh, what's this about?" and they go, I haven't got a Scooby. Scooby Doo, clue. I haven't got a clue. So that's how I would. That's how I have got a Scooby. Um, that things like if you were to say to if you're playing knockdown ginger, knocking on someone's front door and running away,
Mm.
and people say, you're in trouble, you'd better scarper. Scarper flow, it links to go, so you better go. But if you said scarper to any Brit, it's now the word scarper is just, we know that what that means. It means get out of Dodge and now kind of thing. But
Hmm.
we do have, there's just things like we have certain different words, of course, which I'm sure everyone is aware of, pants for trousers and things like that. So I always say to people, if you like someone's trousers, don't say to them, I like your pants, because they'll think they've got a hole in their trousers and you can see their underwear.
Oh,
But I've got a very good friend of mine who's American, my lovely friend Julie, and sometimes I'll say things to her and she will just kind of smile at me and go, yeah. And I'm like, you didn't understand that, didn't you? She's like, no. So even with friends, that sometimes it just goes a bit wonky.
Yeah, and I think the main one that I had to learn is that in America, cheers, you'll just say it like if you're out drinking, cheers. But in the UK, cheers means so much more. It can mean
Yeah,
like, oh, thank you, or I talk to you later, and
yeah,
everything in
yeah.
between.
And you'll find if you're on the phone to somebody, they might hang up by going, yep, cheers, bye, cheers, bye. And it just means exactly that. It's yep, thanks, see you later, chat to you later, all that kind of thing. It's yeah, we're an odd bunch.
Yeah, it's a great word that can mean anything. So we need to
Yeah,
adopt that here.
absolutely.
Perfect. So moving on, what would you say is the best area to stay in when you're in London, or which areas should you avoid completely?
It's a really good question. There's nowhere that you should avoid completely. Not centrally. I mean, anywhere central is going to be great to stay in. I think it always depends on what you want to do with your trip, because London is a huge city, and there are some places where if you are going to spend loads of time going to the theatre and shopping, you're going to want to stay around the sort of Covent Garden, Soho sort of area. If you want to be in the more shishy area and be going to, some of the museums out in the West, you're going to want to stay in Kensington, Knightsbridge. But that is quite expensive. That is a really well-heeled area of London, so the prices go up. My personal favourite is over in the East, in the Shoreditch and Spitalfields area, because there's so much cool stuff there. As I mentioned, I'm a massive fan of street art, so that's where the street art is. It's really local, so you've got loads of great markets, loads of stuff going on, but it is quite far east. So if you then want to go and do, Harrods in the west, that's a bit of a schlep. So I think if you want to stay centrally, stay around Covent Garden, Soho, um, Mayfair as well, although again, Mayfair is going to be very expensive. But realistically, the public transport system in London is so good that you can get anywhere pretty swiftly. There's quite a few affordable hotels up near sort of King's Cross way, and that's pretty good because you can either, if you like walking, you can walk, half an hour into town, or jump on the tube and it's super quick. So I think it just depends on what the vibe is you're going for. If you want high-end luxury, you go west or Mayfair. If you want gritty and more local and a bit unusual, you go east. And if you just want to be slap bang middle, go in the center.
Perfect. So yeah, talking about the tube and the underground, I mean it's probably one of my favorite public transportations I've used in the world, and it's just so simple and like the fact that
Yeah.
you don't even need to get an Oyster card anymore. You can just use your
Yep.
phone or credit card or whatever.
Yeah, it's really easy. You can just use your phone or your, even your Apple iWatch.
Mm.
I mean, I sometimes if I'm going somewhere, I just leave home with my phone, and as long as I've got charge on it, I'm okay because I can, you know, buzz in and out on buses, on tubes, on the boat, even
Yeah.
whatever you want. So it's so handy. And a friend of mine once got locked out of her house, and she knew I had her spare keys, and I was working. And she had nothing on her. I said, "Well, you've got your iWatch, haven't you?" She's like, "Oh yeah." So she managed to get across town on her iWatch to come to me to pick up my keys. So yeah, it's really handy.
Yeah, and so going back to the boat part, I remember that from last time I was there, seeing Uber boat all over the place.
Yep.
Obviously, it's not an Uber, but could you talk a little bit more about Uber boat?
Yeah, so it's actually a company called Thames Clipper, and
Mhm.
they run basically a sort of commuter boat on the river, which a lot of tourists have now tapped into and use it quite a lot because it basically bounces down the river. The reason it's called Uber Boat is very simply they have a sponsor. Um, they don't own it, but they sort of sponsor it, and they have all their branding on it. So before it was some sort of bank, and now it just happens to be Uber. But yeah, it makes everyone's like, "What? You can do that?" Whether or not you can book it on the app, I don't know. I've never tried. You might be able to, but yeah, it's basically the commuter boat.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, probably not. I think, yeah, you see, although they seem to be wanting to sell you everything on Uber now, trains and all sorts.
Yeah. Wow. And so then the other big, I guess, way of getting around that most people would know about is the famous black cabs of
Yep.
London. When would you recommend people to take those apart from the tube?
Okay. Um, I think. I think if you come to London, you've got to have a ride in a black cab, right?
Yeah.
It's a classic thing. One of the great things is after the theatre. It's always nice just to because after theatre it kicks out at I don't know 10:30. All you want to do is pour yourself into a taxi and get home. And they, the taxis are everywhere at the end of the theatre night because they know that people want to do that. So that's a great way to do it. You'll find that if it rains, it's almost impossible to get a cab because
Hmm.
everyone just jumps in cabs. But I think just if probably if you're zipping around in London, you just think actually you look at your travel app and go, well, it's like two different buses and a tube or whatever, just jump in a cab. Um,
Hmm.
you can obviously get Ubers. We do have Ubers too. The thing with Ubers is that they are so the black cabbies, I should probably mention, are just they are really historic. They go back a couple of hundred years, obviously horse and carriage before, but you have to pass several exams and a whole license, a bit like me being a guide, and it's called the knowledge. And what you have to do, if you ever see people zipping around London on a moped with a plastic screen in front of them, sort of peering around at things, that is a black cab driver in training. They have to know forensically every single road in London in a 6 mile radius from the centre of London, which is Trafalgar Square. So if you think about how many hundreds of thousands of roads that is,
Yeah.
they will go into a series of exams and it's usually divided up area by area. And they will say, right, get me from Westminster Abbey to, I don't know, Piccadilly Circus, which actually that's very easy, but anyway, even I could do that. But they have to describe it. So they have to literally say, right, you turn left onto this road, but they're not just talking roads. They're saying you need to turn left at the yellow door. You need to go past the building with the broken guttering on the right hand side. So it's that specific. And they also want them to use the roads that are not the main roads. So the great thing about a black cab is if they don't have to, they won't sit in traffic. They've got all kinds of rat runs they can use. They
Yeah.
cost a bit more than an Uber, sure. Although having said that, Uber's prices have gone up a lot lately, so maybe not. Especially when it's surging, because black cabs don't surge. They put, I think, a small bit on in the evening, but
Hmm.
the minute your bottom hits that seat, you're on your way. There's no messing around with sat navs. They don't use sat navs. You just say, "I'm going here," and they're like, "Off you go!" And yeah, it's so I would say give it a go because it's a great experience. And the new electric cabs, which are still the kind of classic, slightly different in shape, but still the classic. They have an amazing. Well, they've got one extra seat to start with, which is great. You can fit 6 people in, and they have an amazing glass roof, so you can see everything going by too. And they're all electric, and they're all going to have to be electric within a few years. But they're a lot more comfy as well. I didn't say that.
No, that's awesome. So how long does the tube run? Is it 24 hours or does it cut off at a certain time?
Certain days of the week it's 24 hours. So Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and it's not all lines. It's most lines now, but on those 3 nights. Otherwise, the tube cuts off at about 1 in the morning. But there are night buses that run all night, and then it starts up again about 5 in the morning. But on the weekends, they run all the way through, which is very handy indeed.
Yeah. So you said you do some food tours. Can you talk about
Mhm.
some of the must-try dishes when you're in London?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously you've got to try fish and chips. That
Yeah.
is a no-brainer. My top pick for that, again, slightly depends on the area because you're not going to want to schlep across town for one thing in particular. Well, you might, I don't know. Poppies in the East End is phenomenal. Regularly voted one of the best fish and chips in the country. It's absolutely brilliant. There's one in Covent Garden, which is called the Rock and Soul Place, and it's soul like a fish and place like a fish as well. And they're what we call chippies. So a chippy only serves fish and chips, and well, I mean a few other
Hmm.
bits and pieces. They do like a battered sausage and sometimes some jelly deals, but you won't be able to go in there and get, you know, pies and cottage pie and all that sort of stuff. It's they do fish and chips, and you can either eat in or take away. If you're in Mayfair, there's the Mayfair chippy as well, which is very good. So it depends on where you are, but you always take a recommendation for fish and chips because
Hmm.
not all they're not all created equal. Put it that way. You've obviously got to try curry as well. Chicken tikka masala is great, but there are some other amazing dishes. And people often think that curry has to be really hot. It does not, absolutely not. Um, if you fear spice, if you fear heat, then just tell them you want a mild one. You can get all kinds of lovely coconut milk based curries, creamy curries, and they use spices, but it's spices about flavor. And you can say to them, look, I'm really not good with heat, or I can take a little bit, and they will advise you. And they have some great dishes where it's just like sizzling meat and vegetables on a platter and things like that. Um, Indian wise, everybody talks about Dishoom, and Dishoom is great, but because everyone talks about it, everybody goes. One of
Hmm.
my favorites is a little one, and you almost certainly need to pre-book because it's quite small. I don't know how many branches they've got now. It's Cricket with a K, so Kricket. Their food is out of this world. It's amazing. The best Indian you'll ever taste. Absolutely wonderful. Um, then we have an absolute heap of bakeries. If anyone spent any time looking at London food on Instagram, the bakeries are where it's at right now. And that's the really hot trend. Cube croissants and cardamom rolls and all sorts of amazing things. There's a great bakery in the East End, and I think they've got a branch in Covent Garden as well called Fortitude, and their cardamom bun is to die for. It's sticky, it's nutty, it's absolutely gorgeous. So give that a go. And if you do go to Borough Market, which is the very famous food market, um, it's now so famous that it's unbelievably busy, and I think there are some other options which don't get as much of a look in, but they've got some incredible food there, including sausage rolls, crumble. They have a wild mushroom risotto that will knock your socks off. It's so good.
Hmm.
So yeah, some of the things there.
Okay, so on restaurant culture in the UK, is tipping
Mm.
a thing?
So this is something that has started up tipping. What you'll often find is on the bill at the bottom, it will say service charge. Service charge is pretty much an included tip. You can request it taken off if you don't want to pay it, but usually it won't always. So I always check at the bottom. If it says service charge, you don't need to tip. If there's no service charge on there, you can tip. It's not an obligation, and it's certainly not in the US. Like you have to leave a particular amount. We
Hmm.
tend to do about 12.5%, but it's very vague. So say you were having, I don't know, something that cost £17, I'd probably just leave the 20. It's it You don't have to sort of be exact about it, round it up, whatever. But again, there's no obligation to tip. It's a little bit more expected now, but the waiters and waitresses do get a proper pay, so a tip is just a lovely gratuity on top. And the service charge usually is shared between the whole team, so it'll be the waiting staff, the chefs, the pot wash, all of that. Um, Very occasionally, though, a company will take a portion of it, and I will often check and I'll say,
Hmm.
"Do you guys get all of this?" And if they don't, I take it off and give it in cash.
Yeah.
But usually, yeah, check the bill. If it says service charge at the bottom, then the tip is included.
Okay. And so, what are some of the common meal times for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
So, well, dinner usually, I mean, dinner it varies wildly. You will find that most places probably won't serve after about 9:30, but because we've got a massive theatre culture here, there are so many places that do pre-theatre meals. There are some that do post-theatre. So if you're a late eater or your show is short running one, you might want to eat afterwards. Just double check because some places do, a lot don't, but some will, particularly around the Covent Garden area. But realistically, restaurants in London are open pretty much all the time, so you can pop in whenever you like. The one thing, we love a brunch. We love a brunch, particularly on a Sunday. So there are lots of great brunch places out there. And if you want to do afternoon tea, which again is something that you should probably try whilst in London. Again, depending on the venue, some will start serving it at 12 and go through till 5. Some will start about 2. If you do afternoon tea, you will not need a full meal afterwards. So if you're having one at say 3 or 4 o'clock, that will replace a dinner. You could grab a snack in the evening, but you're not going to want a full fish and chip dinner. So I always think a really nice day is a brunch and an afternoon tea. That's perfect.
Okay.
2 meals done. Happy days.
Yeah. So can you talk more about the tea culture in London? Because it's very unique, I feel like, to England.
It is. We are a nation of tea drinkers. My parents live on the stuff. We do have coffee as well, and we have some very, very nice coffee as well. But you'll often find that Brits will, well, I think older Brits will have a coffee in the morning and then they'll switch to tea. Younger Brits will probably have a few coffees throughout the day, but tea is definitely a very, very big part of our psyche. Afternoon tea is the one where you will sit down and have the full kind of cake and sandwich experience. But we love an excuse to have a bit of cake. So afternoon or 11s is in the morning, in the afternoon, you have a cup of tea and a slice of cake. Great stuff. So you'll find a lot of places will do that. If you go into any coffee shop, you'll find they do tea, and they will have an array of gorgeous cakes. It won't just be croissants; it'll be, coffee cakes and red velvets and ginger or whatever. A lemon drizzle, good lemon drizzle. So indulge in that, and particularly if you go to any kind of stately homes or places in the country, it's a well-known thing that you go and you'll do the house, you'll do the gardens, and then you go for a cup of tea and a slice of cake. And if you don't sit down and go, "Ooh, a lovely cup of tea," then you're not a Londoner or you're not a Brit. You have to do the whole, "Ooh, yeah, let's have a cup of tea." That's a call to action right there. Call to arms.
And so is high tea a different thing, or is that kind of just your afternoon tea? That's just another term for it.
So high tea is it's called high tea in the US. It's afternoon tea for us.
Okay.
So if you just have if you're having tea and a slice of cake in the afternoon, that will just be a cup of tea and a bit of cake. But afternoon tea is what you'd call high tea. So that's with the tiered thing, the sandwiches, the scones, the cakes, all of that. It's fantastic. Yeah, afternoon tea or high tea.
Okay, and maybe a loaded question, but what is the correct way to drink tea?
Ooh, okay. Now this is a thing that sparks debate. And in fact, I was watching something just the other day that the debate sort of rears its head every couple of years. Do you put the milk in first? Do you put the tea in first? Well, if you, frankly, from my point of view, if you put the milk in first, you're a psychopath. The tea goes in first, and then you add the milk. Because if you put the milk in, you don't know how well the tea is going to be done. So you need to have the correct, because tea is a very personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has it a particular way, a different color, a different strength. So yeah, it's very personal. A lot of people will have what we call builder's tea, and that's the kind of tea that you would make a cup of tea for a builder at home, and it's usually strong, really dark
Mm-hmm.
brown, with milk in, and sometimes some sugars, depends on your personal taste. But some people like a weak tea. Those people are very weird, but hey, some people do. It's rare that people will have a black tea. Brits, if you ask for no milk in your tea, they will look at you like you've just insulted their family. So even if you think you don't like tea with milk in, try it, because I think it's great.
So in Texas, where I am, it's very common to drink sweet tea or iced tea. How weird of a look would you get in the UK if you asked for one of those?
If you ask for iced tea in the UK, you might find a bottle of Lipton iced tea in the fridge, but you will
Mm-hmm.
not be getting an iced tea the way that you would know it. We don't do that.
Yeah.
They would probably go, well, like, we can give you a hot tea and some ice cubes, and they will think you're insane. I've often had people ask in cafes, and I've been there with, we just don't do that here. But if you find a bottle of Lipton iced tea, that's the best you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
But no, iced tea itself is not a thing. And I should also say, actually, afternoon tea, the high tea, I think in the US, a lot of people think it's what little girls do at parties.
Yeah.
Not over here. If a kid gets to go to an afternoon tea, they are one of the luckiest children alive. Afternoon teas, we use them for celebrations, so birthdays, hen dos. If you're seeing friends that you haven't seen for a while, let's go for an afternoon tea. It's a special occasion, and
Mm-hmm.
little kids, it's quite rare that you'd be invited to do that. So yeah, it's quite different. I remember seeing that on Ted
Yeah.
Lasso, and they were like, you go for afternoon tea? No, that's for kids. I was like, no, it's not. And I went and did some digging. I was like, oh, in the US it is. Okay. No, over here
Yeah.
it's very much not. It's an adult thing for the most part. There are some afternoon teas that cater for kids. There's a
Mhm.
really great Charlie and the Chocolate Factory one, and they often do some themed ones. So yeah, there are ones for kids for sure. But for us, we also like to add on champagne as well, and there's any excuse to drink, frankly. So yeah.
There you go. So, how many days would you recommend somebody to spend in London, and what should they do?
Slightly depends where you're coming from. I think if you're coming from the western side of the USA or really far afield, you want it probably a bit longer. New York's quite good because you can zip over for a long weekend. I think you probably about 5 days for your first trip is great. And you're going to want to spend at least one day doing all the big things: your Westminster Abbey, changing of the guard, seeing the crown jewels at the Tower of London. Um, they're quite spread apart, so you might want to do them in separate days. But there's so many things in London and so many um, free things, free museums, incredible art galleries and exhibitions, and just places to explore. Areas to wander around and just soak up, because every single area of London is different. It's got its own unique flavor. It's got its own architecture, because London originally started out quite small and then gradually grew. And if you like, sucked little villages in. So every area used to be a village, and it's got its own vibe, it's got its own sensibility. So I think 5 days is really good, and you can do as much. Some people love to go hell for leather and cram it all in. Other people like to do one or two things in a day and then chill. I think 5 days is good, and you can maybe get out of town on one day, go to Windsor Castle or Hampton Court Palace, head down river to Greenwich maybe, um, and then I think the second trip you come back is when you do the stuff that's less well known. That's what I find anyway for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, for the changing of the guard, do you have any tips and tricks for people since that is such a huge event?
Oh yeah. Now, what a lot of people will do is go and stand at the gates to Buckingham Palace. Don't do this. It gets so busy, you'll be jammed in the middle of a crowd, you probably won't see much, and you'll get stuck there. So my top tip for you is um so the whole thing takes about probably about an hour to an hour and 10. You don't want or need to stay for all of that. The best way to do it's set up like a triangle. So my top tip would be to stand. So in front of Buckingham Palace, you've got the gates and where everybody stands. Then you've got the road, and in the middle of the road there is a golden statue, which is the Statue of Victory. And then on the other side of that are some gardens with a little, well, like small kind of, not really gardens, but flower beds with a little road and some, barricades to stop you going onto the road. That right there, so opposite Buckingham Palace, but not in front of Buckingham Palace, is perfect, because you'll get the guards coming from your right hand side who are coming from the another palace a bit further down to come and join their regiment, and from the left you'll get the new guards coming on duty. The first guards will come down at about 10:40. The new guards will come up at about 10:50, 10:55. Then after that, they stand at Buckingham Palace for about half an hour, and they play tunes and what have you. And that's the physical changing where they go, right, Bob, you switch with Simon, and Jeff, you switch with Mike, or whatever. And
Hmm.
then about half an hour later, they do the same thing in reverse. Now, if you want to stay for all of that, you can. I think it's a bit mad because you get the same thing twice. So I would go either for the early bit or the late bit. They come out from Buckingham Palace at about 11:25 maybe. Um, but you don't need to stay for the whole thing. So I think get in there, get a good position, see the early bit or the late bit, and then you can head away knowing that you've seen the best bit, got the best view. That would be my top tip.
And so, is it the same kind of processional every day, or on the weekend, is there maybe a bigger one, or
That's every other day.
okay.
Although in the summer, usually it depends slightly on the year, but usually June, July, they do it every day. But they haven't released the dates for this year, so check if you're coming this year. So it's every other day: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Um, and yeah, it's the same thing every time. The only thing that changes a little bit, in the summer they wear red jackets, the red tunics. In the winter they have a grey overcoat. So you'll still have the bearskin hats, but the grey overcoat. Also in the summer, the guards get incredibly busy with a whole heap of, duties they have to do. So one of the regiments may be replaced by another army regiment, or even Royal Air Force or Navy regiment, or sometimes even we've had the Mounties come in from Canada, some Commonwealth countries come and visit. There will always be one of the two that have the bearskin hats, which is why it's quite good to be at that spot where you can see both. So if one doesn't have the bearskins, the other one will. But apart from that, it's always the same. The one thing it's worth knowing, though, if it rains, they will cancel it. And that will sometimes be at the last minute. So
Hmm.
I think if you're coming for 5 days and you're, say, 3 of the days that you're here, the change of the guard is happening, keep an eye on the weather, and then I'd say probably try and go earlier in the week, because then at least you've got 2 more chances to catch it if it cancels. That would be my top tip. The horses, however, will change even if it's bucketing down with rain. So you'll always get to see the horses, even if you can't see the foot guards.
Perfect. So, a lot of famous movies were filmed in London, and I think a lot of people who are fans of those come to London specifically to see those sites.
Mm.
So, I think Harry Potter probably comes to mind immediately, and all the famous sites around the city. I think the only one I really got to see was Platform 9 3/4, and I saw the line of people waiting to just take a picture
Yeah.
right there, and I just walked right past it. But do you have any like tips for any of those top sites for people to have the best experience and see what they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I should have mentioned at the top, one of my other specialisms is Harry Potter and movie tours. I do lots of movie
Okay.
locations. Pretty much anywhere that you can think of in London has been used either inside or out for movies. So yeah, you've got Harry Potter. The Marvel films were shot here. You've got your Sherlocks. You've got things like The Crown. Oh my goodness, so many Paddington, Harry Potter. There's so many that are here. There is a movie map. Now, I probably should have looked at before. There's a really good movie locations map which show you lots of places in London where different films have been shot. Um, Realistically, though, and I know this is going to sound like a plug, it's not really, but the best way is to find a tour that's doing it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you'll go and be like, oh, this is where it says it was, I don't quite, and then the guide can be like, now this is where this happened, and I'll show you a picture and all that sort of thing. Um, there's some great Harry Potter locations, so there's a lot of brilliant sites of pilgrimage in London. You're right, at King's Cross, they've got the chariot in the wall, and the line is intense, and can sometimes people will queue for 2 to 3 hours to have their
Wow.
photo. But you've also got in there the spot where Harry meets Ron and Ginny for the first time, which is round, well, supposedly platform 9 3/4. It's actually between 6 and 7,
Hmm.
because there was a slight mistake in the book. There's no wall between 9 and 10. Never mind.
Hmm.
And also, right out the front, King's Cross is linked to another station called St Pancras, and that is the amazing red brick building where, in the second movie, the blue car takes off from, and Mr. Weasley parks in front of there, and then they fly it to Hogwarts from that building. So there's a few little bits and pieces there. So even if you go there, and there's the shop, of course, as well. So even if you go there and you don't want to wait quite sensibly in line, then that's fine. But there's other things to see. But I should say, if you are a Harry Potter fan and you are going to the Warner Brothers studio tour, did you do that when you were there?
I did not.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing. There are some more photo opportunities for that there, and you don't have to wait. So if you're doing that, I wouldn't bother waiting in line at the platform 9 3/4.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I think a movie tour is definitely worth adding to your list while you're in town.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Are there any off the beaten path or day trips that you would recommend people to visit? Say, maybe not necessarily on your first trip to London, but once you're coming back for the second time, what are some more local things that you should experience?
Okay, well, thinking about day trips out, a lot of people go to Windsor Castle, which is great,
Mm.
but it's quite
Mhm.
busy. My personal favourite, and you can do it on the train from London, it takes about an hour to get there, is Hampton Court Palace.
Hmm.
It's not that far out, but it's quite a nice sort of slow train that chugs through the countryside to get there. This is a Tudor palace that was owned by Henry VIII, and in fact, he took 5 of his 6 wives on honeymoon there. So it's yeah, definitely a place he quite liked. But unlike Windsor Castle, which is still lived in, and therefore, whilst it's a castle, and you go and see the staterooms, it feels quite modern. The Hampton Court Palace is one where it feels ancient, and you feel like Henry VIII could come around the corner at any moment. They have the most incredible banqueting hall. You get to see the kitchens and the most fabulous gardens. There's a maze there. It's brilliant. I absolutely love it. It's got a great playground for kids as well if you're traveling with kids. In London, a lot of people ignore Greenwich, and I love Greenwich. I live fairly nearby,
Hmm.
and you can. It's so if you look at a map of London, the River Thames comes all the way through the middle, and then off to the right, it does a massive big loop, kind of goes down and then back up again. At the bottom of that loop is where Greenwich is, and the UK, well, Great Britain, we're an island, so we've always had to know how to sail. So our maritime history is incredibly important. And that is where the maritime history is. You have the Meridian line, so the Greenwich Mean Line, 0 hour. You can stand with your foot on
Hmm.
either side of the line. The painted hall there is beautiful. It's got a real villagey vibe as well. So there's a fantastic market, quite a few free museums. The National Maritime Museum is down there, is amazing. And my top recommendation would be to arrive by boat, so arrive as the sailors would have done as well. And then within London, gosh, there's so many things that people don't visit on a first trip. I love the area known as Maid of Ale. It's known as Little Venice because all the canals are up
Mm.
there. You can spend a wonderful day just wandering along the canal. And if that's your vibe, you can wander as far as Camden. The East End, a lot of people don't go to too. So that's your street art, great food, a lot of Brick Lane, which is full of the Indian restaurants. There's an amazing flower market there on a Sunday. And that area is brilliant. Places like Hoxton and Haggerston, where it's real local London, and there's amazing things like Museum of the Home and just great street art and great food around there. A lot of people go to Borough Market for their food. I strongly recommend another market. Well, it's not quite the same. It's not a market in that you go and pick up vegetables, but you go and it's a street food market, and it's called Mercato Metropolitano. There are two of them. There's Mercato Mayfair, but the bigger one, Metropolitano, is so great. It's near an area called Elephant and Castle. There's a few theatres in that area, so you might be going there for the theatre, and it's a great place to stop for dinner. But it's this huge food hall where you've just got street food from around the world, and you can just go and grab a spot to sit, and then everyone just goes and grabs their own thing. It's brilliant. I really love it.
So you've talked a lot about the theater culture in London. Are there
Mm.
any specific theaters that you would recommend, or it's just if a show looks interesting to you, you'll kind of
Yeah,
feel it out?
I'm a big theatre goer, so I see a lot of stuff. But I have to say there's a couple of shows which are amazing. I mean, obviously everyone goes to see the Les Mis and Phantom and things like that, which are brilliant. But there are lots of other smaller productions that are phenomenal. There's one called Operation Mincemeat,
Hmm.
and this is a sleeper hit. It the reason it doesn't sound like it would be amazing. It's a comedy musical about a plot in the Second World War to convince Hitler of false intelligence. Now that doesn't sound like the natural bedfellows, do they? But it's a really fascinating story, which actually I've talked about on one of the first things we talked about on the podcast that I run. And they made a comedy musical about it the other year. We went with our podcast listeners. We had a big outing. We all went to see it, and then it was so good, and it's now got a West End transfer, and it has had the greatest number of 5-star reviews that any show in the West End has ever had throughout all of its history. It is incredible. I would strongly recommend going to see it. There's another great little play, which again started out as a sleeper hit, but is now a really big one, which may have transferred to Broadway, called The Play That Goes Wrong. And it's a
Hmm.
farce. It's all about basically a theatre production where, the name suggests everything goes wrong, scenery falls over, people fall out of windows. It's If you like a bit of slapstick and a bit of comedy, physical comedy, it's fantastic. But the thing with London is that alongside all of the really big hits, you've got lots of theatres that are doing plays and musicals and all sorts of things for short periods. So whenever you
Hmm.
come, there'll be something new. Always check and see what's being talked about, because there'll be something that's new that is going great guns, and get a ticket for it. And Six the musical, of course, is huge now, and again I saw
Yeah.
that when it was just a little baby,
Hmm.
and it went massive. And so there's a lot of things that are long running, but you'll find things that are on for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and some of them will have some of the most amazing stars in them, either movie stars occasionally, which I prefer sort of to see the theatre stars, because I think it's always lovely to do that. you get shows with people like theatre stars like Mark Rylance, who he won the Oscar a couple of years ago for Bridge of Spies, but he is, his blood runs theatre, and I've seen him in some incredible shows, and he's phenomenal. So you get some incredible performances. A lot of playwrights like Jez Butterworth, who's an incredible playwright, just got a new play in London at the moment, which is running again a short run. His stuff is incredible. So just to have a look, see what floats your boat, take a few recommendations, see where the buzz is when you come, because we have some long running shows, but we have a lot that pop in and out. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that there was a slot and they put the show on, and yeah, it's great. So yeah, give things a punt.
You have the modern shows. Would you also recommend people to check out Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, or is that
Oh yeah. Oh
okay?
goodness, Shakespeare's Globe is phenomenal. It's you can visit it and do tours
Mhm.
around there, and it's the theatre, very not on the exact site, but very close to the site that Shakespeare had his original Globe Theatre, and they have made it in exactly the same way. So wattle and daub walls, so that's packed earth and interlaced wood. It's open, so that it's in a circle, and there's no roof. If you're sitting in the seats, you're a bit covered. If you're standing as a groundling, which you can do for £15, then you're out to the elements. There's no miking up, so the players have to project. There's the only thing that's different now is there's a little bit of lighting at night, and they have a sprinkler system on the roof, because the previous one burned down. So we learn
Yeah.
from our mistakes eventually. And they run shows through the summer or spring, summer. So they'll start probably in about April and go through to about September, October. The performances there are phenomenal, and it's amazing. And right next to it is a little covered theatre, which is called the Wanamaker, the Sam Wanamaker Theatre. Sam Wanamaker was an American theatre producer who kind of came over and went, "Where's the Globe Theatre?" And we were like, "Oh, it's there somewhere." And he was like, "What?" So he bought the ground and made the Globe. Rather sadly, died just before it was finished. And so now there's another theatre next to it, entirely lit by candlelight. And they now, because it is covered, they do stuff all the way through the year there, and that's the Sam Wanamaker Theatre. But yeah, performances at the Globe and the Wanamaker are phenomenal. So yeah, if you're a Shakespeare fan, definitely book in for that.
Yeah, no, I definitely caught a show when I was there, and that's another great opportunity that you have to take the Thames Clipper, the Uber boat, because it
Mm.
drops you off right there, which is so convenient.
Yeah, very much so. It drops you off right outside, super easy. And if you can stand up for the whole performance, go for a groundling ticket, because it's phenomenal. Because the actors often come through the audience. They throw. I mean, I've been to ones where they've thrown things into the audience. I went to one which was Macbeth, and they stretched a black bit of fabric out from the front of the stage all the way to where the posh people were sitting in the seats. And as a groundling, you went in. I think at the time it was like £5 to go. You went in. You stuck your head through a little slits that were all over this bit of material, and
Mm.
so the entirety of the show, all you could see were all the groundlings' heads. But they were pumping in smoke, so like smoke was sort of puffing out of your neck hole, and then the witches would run around underneath and like grab people as they went. You'd sort of hear people go "ah" from the other side of the thing. It was amazing. And if you get there nice and early, you can actually go and stand and even lean on the front of the stage. And I've been to, I think, Titus Andronicus, and I was leaning on the front of the stage, and at one point the actor who was on stage at that time was, I mean, half a foot in front of me, and I was literally staring at his feet. And this is how much effort they put into the shows, is that he had just, I think, killed someone or done something bloody, and his feet were covered in blood and mud, and I was just watching his feet like squelch around, and it was like, it's unbelievable the amount of work they put in. It's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important thing to point out too, is that you definitely have to stand during the show. If you are on the ground area, if you try and sit down, they will come right
Yeah,
up to you and tell you, nope, you got to
yeah, it's part
stand,
of
you
the
got to
deal.
go. Yeah. Cool. So just to start wrapping things up, is there anything else that you think people should know before coming to London for the first time?
Ooh. um One thing, so a couple of things that happen with my guests a lot is people will often bring lots of cash. London, a lot of it is now cashless, so just either get a card, a preloaded card that's got loads of money on, or um, make sure that you're with a bank that where the charges aren't, too drastic. But honestly, we pay for everything pretty much, and some places don't even accept cash anymore. So I would say have a little bit of cash for emergencies or tips and things like that, sure, but don't come with hundreds in cash because you'll probably end up going home with it.
Yeah.
One of my top tips as well is for getting around London, download a little app called City Mapper. If some people might be used to New York or Paris, where I think it operates as well. It's a free app, and what you can do is you can set a home, so you can set your hotel as home, and then you can just put in either wherever you want to go, or if you're going back to the hotel, just click Get Me Home, and it will tell you the best way to do it. This line going that direction, the next train is in 3 minutes, or the next bus is in 15 minutes, or if you walk 5 minutes this way, that's you'll get on this bus. It's invaluable, and a lot of Londoners use it. So it's a really good resource. What else would I recommend? Weather-wise, I mean, even if it's the summer or the winter, you never quite know what you're going to get. So make sure that you've got options. I often go out with sunglasses and an umbrella, and it's the law of the land that if you take an umbrella with you, it will mean that it won't rain, but if you don't take one, it will rain. So always go prepared and go with layers. Layers are key in London. 1 minute it'll be beautiful and sunny, and the next minute the wind will have got up and you'll wish you had a slightly thicker coat. So layers are key. It's back to that old phrase, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. That's the best way to approach it. And then I think just be curious. Do a bit of research, find things that are, I often think a lot of people will see things on Instagram, social media, and will schlep across the entire city to go and have a croissant at a particular bakery. London's huge. You can do so much more with your time. And, if you happen to be in the area or you're going for something else, great, go do it. But I think a lot of people are so intent on going to see something that is an Insta-friendly thing, which may or may not be good. Some are great, some are less than exciting. I had a guest the other week who wanted to go and see the Butterfly Trail because someone had done a reel on it on social media. It's not really a thing. There's a new place in the centre of London, which is these amazing screens, and they do these brilliant sort of productions, but they last like 5 to 10 minutes, and they're not worth going out of your way for. So I think if you find something you think you like, just do a bit of extra digging. Is it worth going to see? Is it, an hour's journey for 5 minutes that is a bit underwhelming? And yeah, but I think, and also because London is so big, try and group your days. So a lot of people want to do Westminster Abbey, Change of the Guard, Cabinet Warrens, Tower of London, which is great. Tower of London is on the other side of the city. So maybe combine that with the East End, or do Tower of London, Tower Bridge, and then maybe go down to Greenwich or Borough Market. And then when you're on the other day, do Westminster Abbey, Change of the Guards, Buckingham Palace, the Mews, Cabinet Warrens, Covent Garden, because you can spend quite a lot of, so I map it out, see what's where, and then divide it up, because otherwise you'll end up zipping back and forth and wasting time. Yeah, but that's some of my top tips.
No, those are great tips. So, Alex, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. How can people connect with you if they want to learn more about London, or if they're coming to London and looking for a tour guide?
Sure. Well, you can find me on socials at tourguide.alex. My website is alexlacey.com. I also have audio tours that I've recorded in London. I've partnered with a company called Around, and there's 4 tours. There's a Westminster one, which is sort of intro to London, a Secrets of Covent Garden, which is all the stuff you'd miss, a Riverside one, and a Blood and Guts Crime and Punishment one as well. There may be more coming. So you can find those on my website and click through, and they're about, I don't know, I think they're about sort of $9 a tour or something like that. So super affordable. I've got a podcast, which is called Ladies Who London, which is me and my colleague Fiona talking about all things London, the stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know. It's not all women's history, but because we're women, that's why it's Ladies Who London. We've been going for about 3.5 years, and a whole back catalogue of podcasts, so come and have a little listen. Yeah, but just Alex Lacey, Lacey. Find me there.
Well, perfect. No, this has been a ton of fun, and yeah, thank you so much again.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alex. And yeah, I'll look forward to listening.
I hope you've enjoyed my interview with Alex. As a reminder, you can find all of her recommendations and more on my website, www.tllpod.com. If you'd like to learn how to make fish and chips, you can find the recipe on my Instagram and TikTok at tll_pod. Come back next week for an episode on one of Switzerland's most popular cities, Zurich. But until then, happy traveling.